Hello, Rank Squad. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds or Aviator Nation, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the businesses, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, who are home of the number one checkout on the planet. And the not so secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning that there are way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ranks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ranks to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/ranks.
Dougie.
Sam.
Barcelona exited the Champions League this week in glorious failure, but despite that, it still promises to be an incredible season, engineered by Hansi Flick. What has he done to turn this club around?
In terms of the squad that they have, Hansi Flick has done a really good job in terms of marrying the camp and obviously building something really well and, breeding a really exciting football team.
But his resume did take a hit with Germany. Going out of the World Cup like that, and then what we saw last year from Germany during those friendlies, it was despicable. And it didn't feel like Hansi Flick had any connection with the players.
When Barcelona appointed German coach Hansi Flick in the summer of 2024, it was a bit of a surprise. But nearly a year on, Barcelona are still on for a treble season. How did Hansi Flick do it? And is this Barcelona different now?
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of The Truth. I am your host, Sam Tighe, sat at home. Joining me is Dougie Critchley, sat in the studio. What's gone wrong here?
Yeah, I've got to take it on the chin, this one. You clearly outlined that you couldn't record in the studio today, and I just left Sky. I admittedly did get up very early to do some Champions League work this morning and didn't sleep very much last night because it went to extra time and because it was such an epic game between Barcelona and Inter that I then couldn't sleep for ages. So either way, I haven't had much sleep, and I left Sky on autopilot and headed to our usual studio. So I'm here solo, missing you guys, but great to hear from you.
Yeah, you guys there, reference a plural. Our voice of God producer, Jack Collins, is, as usual, here too. Jack, you're sat at home as well. It is. We got the message. We got the memo.
Well, the funniest bit about this is that I actually was in the studio literally 45 minutes again. I was here literally, and I left the studio and I was on the way home. I must have missed Dougie by about 5 minutes and literally was waiting for the bus to head home. And then suddenly I get this text being like, oh no, I'm in Smith. And I was like, all right. So we've had to run through all the elements. Hopefully all the audio sound is working. We've done some video calls. So I'm looking forward to this episode.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'm going to start us off with a little story before we tuck into the main meal of this podcast. And it relates to Sky Sports, actually, Dougie. I was there on Tuesday. I was doing the Transfer Talk podcast with Dharmesh Sheth and Pete Graves. And we stepped out of the studio having finished the production. I was just having a quick chat with the producer just before I tucked myself away and did a bit of writing. And Duncan Ferguson walked around the corner. Duncan Ferguson, for those of you Prem heads that remember from yesteryear, probably one of the most fierce and intimidating target men of all time. Scored a lot of headers, roughed up a lot of defenders. And trust me, I don't know how old he is now, probably about 50. He is still in absolutely phenomenal physical shape. And he still cuts a very intimidating figure. He walked around the corner.
What size was he against you?
Well, I was taller, but shoulders, the broad shoulders on this man, I can't compete. Anyway, I was stood there talking to the producer, and I was literally about to leave. So I had my laptop in my hand, and I think I was kind of half waving it around a little bit while gesticulating. And he walks around the corner. Bear in mind, I've got nothing to do with Duncan Ferguson. He's on some other show. He's going into the studio, but he walks straight up to us and introduces himself. Himself to producer John, holds his hand out, shakes his hand, and then turns to me and holds his hand out to me. I'm holding my laptop. So what I do is I put my laptop down on the table to my right, and I sort of put it down sideways up. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
Not rather than just down flat. I just pop it down very
I'm with
quickly.
you.
And then as I move my right hand up to shake Duncan Ferguson's hand, I knock my laptop and it starts to teeter on the edge of the desk. I catch this in my peripheral vision. And as I'm shaking his hand, I note I can see it happening, and I think something kicks in, and I go, I need to save my laptop here. So I rip my hand out of his handshake, and I'm halfway through introducing myself. I'm halfway through the sentence. Hi, my name is Sam. So I only get through the first half of my name, which is only 3 letters long. As I rip my hand out of Duncan Ferguson's firm grip and save my laptop. And because I only got halfway through my name, he thinks my name is Zach. Because I only got to Sat. Hi, my name is Sat. And that was it. And so he was like, nice to meet you, Zach, and walked off.
Did you save the laptop?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Good senses from you. Amazing.
Straight out of I don't know, the thick of it.
Oh, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
It's absolutely ridiculous.
Duncan Ferguson, one of the great Premier League target men, walking around thinking you met a bloke named Zach who can't put a laptop down properly.
I think he'll probably be impressed by your reflexes. He might try and recruit you for his next 5-a-side session in goal. Thinking of 2,000 strikers and embarrassing stories, I went to a thing it was organised by the Bundesliga last year, and it was a photo opportunity at the end of it with Roy Mackay, and it was with the Bundesliga trophy, and his hand was behind it. My hand tried to go behind the trophy too, and I ended up holding his hand as the photo was taken. And the photo, there's a series of them, and Roy Mackay slowly turns to me and just thinks are you trying to hold my hand? But we never really talk about it again. And he just looks at me very, very strangely. So we've all embarrassed ourselves in front of, naughty strikers, Sam.
Okay, good to know. Does he still text or no?
He never even texted. He never even said goodbye. We just held hands briefly and moved on.
Dearie me, Roy Mackay. Well, Duncan was very polite.
Sounds like a lovely man.
I did him. I don't know what kind of content he was doing, but walked straight up to us. Nice to meet him anyway. A very intimidating figure. I think that was part of it. I saw the size of his shoulders and just panicked. Anyway, we're talking Hansi Flick today, and we're going to sort of merge 2 ideas together because Dougie wanted to talk about Hansi Flick. He wanted to talk about that you sort of build it as a managerial redemptive arc, so to speak, Dougie. And I like that idea, but ultimately I have not stopped thinking about Inter Milan versus Barcelona since the moment the game stopped. It was a game I had hoped would never end. I was delighted to see it go to extra time, and I was hoping for a never-ending penalty shootout. I'd like to still be watching it now. So we're going to merge the 2 concepts. We're going to talk about the game, as it was a hell of a tie, and we're going to move into Hansi Flick off the back of it. So, Dougie, Barca drew 3-3 with Inter in the first leg, and we all said that was one of the best games we've seen in years, and it will be an incredibly tough act to follow. And then they delivered, didn't they? They followed. I mean, 3-3 again, and then 4-3 into extra time with Davide Fratesi, iconic winning goal and celebration, climbing up the rails to celebrate. Just amazing stuff. Beautiful carnage, I'd call it.
100%. There were so many moments that felt like they were going to be etched in anyone that watched its memory for the rest of their days. That Rafinha, what felt like a massive winner in the 87th minute. Barca then led for 6 minutes. Acerbi popping up at the near post with an amazing finish, ripping off his shirt, age 37, amazing celebration from him. And then from extra time onwards, it did feel like Inter had real momentum. And it was, I think people have been talking about whether it was the best Champions League semi-final tie of all time. Personally, I'll never forget that week where Liverpool beat Barcelona and then Spurs beat Ajax, but they were almost more pure comebacks, more consistent comebacks. In terms of a tie and swings of momentum, I don't think there was anything like this in terms of just the pure exhaustion of it. And for Barcelona to only be ahead for 6 minutes across the entire tie, despite playing, particularly in the first leg, I thought really, really, to a really, really high level, I think is pretty remarkable. And Inter massively improved in the second leg, but to lose that 2-goal advantage, looked like they were going out at home, having lost the Coppa Italia a couple of weeks ago, been knocked out of it by Milan, having ceded advantage to Napoli in Serie A. The title, the headlines were all there, bottlers, and they stuck with it. And Fratesi popped up with a moment that I think will be remembered forever. But I do think this is a really interesting topic because we've talked about Simone Inzaghi, and I said, get him to Real Madrid, which was slightly a little bit tongue-in-cheek at the time. But there's a very decent chance that he now goes and wins the Champions League. I think they'll be arguably favourites given their experience in 2023 against either PSG and Arsenal. And we are filming this on Wednesday night prior to that game. But I think they'll be favourites in that game. And I think the way that they showed that they can live kind of with any situation was really, really impressive. So Simone Inzaghi to Real Madrid doesn't feel like such a pipe dream anymore, although Xabi Alonso, Jurgen Klopp, they still feel much more likely, or Ancelotti just even staying. But I was pleased with the overall result. But Sam, what a tie. And I suppose from a Barcelona perspective and a Hansi Flick perspective, there'll be lots of looking back at this tie and almost thinking what might have been, because particularly in the first leg, the level they produced was pretty remarkable.
It was, yeah. I saw a headline earlier that Hansi Flick was raging about the penalty call and the 50-50s that he perceived to have all gone Inter's way. And I started to read it and I just closed the window. I closed the tab because I don't want to deal with any of that. Like, I want to keep this game pure and crystallized in my mind as just an incredible display of football. And I'm not interested in refereeing conspiracies and VAR problems. And not letting that tarnish the image of this game, these 210 minutes in my mind, because it was just phenomenal. Some of the football that was played, phenomenal. Some of the storylines to emerge from it, just incredible. I mean, I was watching Rafinha stand on the pitch and crying at full time, and I thought, literally 30 minutes ago, you scored what should have been the winning goal. Like, Barcelona should have been able to win this game from a position of a lead with 3 minutes to go, Rafinha having scored the goal. And as between Rafinha scoring and Acerbi equalising, Lamine Yamal hit the post. I mean, it's absolute. And I've never seen a shot bounce off the post like that. It's just ridiculous. Absolutely
Jan
ridiculous.
Sommer talked about that afterwards, and he was like, he went to the near post. I just wasn't expecting it at all, because every other effort he had was kind of that curling shot, which Jan Sommer seemed to have kind of covered every time. I mean, Jan Sommer, what a performance from him.
Yeah, incredible. Add him to the list of storylines, but I think we'll start with Yamal here. 6 shots in the first leg, 9 shots in the second leg. Very rare to see such volume and production go through one player when top teams play. Very rare to see so much play funneled through one player, because everybody on the pitch knows that he is absolutely humming. He got 7 of those shots on target in total. He scored once, hit the woodwork 3 times. I was looking at the stats earlier. Opta gave him 14 contests won in the second leg alone. A contest, from Opta's perspective, is a sort of if you beat your man, or if you do a skillful trick and beat your man. It's something along those lines. It's quite vague, but it basically means you did something impressive, did something skillful, or beat your man. I mean, honestly, I do have a look at this stat here and there. Very, very good attackers rarely get to 5 in a single game, and Yamal got to 14. No wonder Federico Di Marco said that he's better than Messi after the first leg, after he'd been sat on his arse all night long. But yeah, beyond those stats, the performances from Yamal were just out of this world. And I guess if you wanted to spin it negatively, you could say that ultimately, he wasn't able to score any more than 1 goal from quite a lot of shots. It's fine margins, but he's hit the woodwork 3 times, and it's those fine margins that have seen Barcelona go out. But you look at the gravity of the performance, you look at the creativity and the ingenuity and the stuff that he's doing, the way he's beating players. It just moved me over the 2 legs in a way that footballers don't tend to move me anymore.
Yeah, it was sensational, wasn't it? And I think everyone's probably come to the similar agreement that Kylian Mbappé may be perceived as the best player in the world up until this season. I think Yamal might have taken his crown and is definitely one of the most entertaining players that I've seen in my years watching football. And I put him right up there with Messi in that sort of entertainment bracket. Not quite there yet in terms of entertainment, but yeah, just an absolutely phenomenal tie. I also thought Pedri had a phenomenal first leg. I thought he was pretty quiet last night, and huge credit to the likes of Henrik Mkhitaryan, Barella, who really came into it last night as well. I thought he had a much better game than he did at Montjuic as well. And then Dundle Dumfries as well needs a shout out. 7 goals from Inter Milan. He was directly involved in 5 of them. Absolutely freakish display from him. And he's not the most tidy footballer to watch, but oh my goodness, he is effective. And then some players from Barcelona's perspective really stepped up as well. Like Gerard Martin had a really difficult first leg, was substituted. In the first half of this game last night, was again being torn apart by Dumfries. Thuram was pulling all over him. But some of the balls and deliveries he gave in that second half of the second leg, remarkable. Dani Olmo probably didn't have his best night either. Lautaro Martinez, half fit, clearly unable to run, popping up with a goal and then winning a penalty. And actually, bizarrely, I think being kind of half fit almost helped him with the penalty because he clearly didn't have the usual explosive pace. And he's not particularly quick either, but he couldn't burst past Kubasi. So he manipulated the ball and got his legs in the perfect position to win a penalty. So massive respect to him. And then Simone Inzaghi
as well from Çalhanoğlu. The penalty was like brilliant. It's like a laser into the bottom corner. Yeah, Lautaro seemed to recover from a hamstring injury in 6 days.
I mean, semi-recover, but it was phenomenal.
Yeah. Thuram, I'll give a shout out to Thuram as well. I think he's my last one before we move on to Flick, because in that second leg, I mean, he opened the scoring for this whole thing in the first leg with a remarkable goal, but he battled away up there for 120 really difficult minutes. He was absolutely mega, Thuram. He put everything into that performance. There's so much of the dirty work from the striker that needs to happen to activate all of those into dynamic attacking players and wing backs and midfielders coming forward. And when you're sieged with you've got 25% possession and you're just trying to dig your way out of the defensive third and Barca are going at you. How important is that figure of Thuram to hold the ball up and just have a bit of patience and be able to hang on to it and bring everybody up the pitch a little bit? Just superb. He was absolutely brilliant. And there was a bit of nonsense at the end from people suggesting that he was laughing at Lamine Yamal, which didn't seem to be remotely true. No. If his Instagram story today is very respectful of Lamine Yamal, so I think he's managed to put that one to bed. I was super impressed. Look, on to Hansi Flick here, the losing manager, unfortunately. In games like this, somebody's got to lose. And it felt tough on whoever it was going to be, and it was Hansi Flick. But this season, he's obviously put himself into a fantastic position to, fall slightly short in the Champions League, but semi-finals is nothing to be sniffed at. Domestically, they've been absolutely brilliant. This counts as a bit of a redemptive arc, Dougie, and I'm going to throw you the floor because I agree with you. He was on his knees not long ago as a manager.
Yeah, it's easy to forget just where he was. And I think, this season, there's the Copa del Rey in the bag. There's the Spanish Super Cup in the bag. I think most people who maybe don't watch La Liga on a weekly basis or haven't really paid that much attention to Barcelona kind of fell in love with his style of play. And almost, I heard Thierry Henry say last night that they've become bored by modern football in the last 2 years, which is something that I don't really subscribe to, but I've heard a lot of people say it this year.
Yeah.
But I think it's impossible to have watched this tie and the way Barcelona play and how thin that line is between triumph and disaster in the way they play with that high line and the pressing and the intensity with which they counterattack and the play of Pedri and Dani Olmo and Rafinha and Yamal, and not fall in love with the style he brings to the game. But they've now got a bit of a battle on. They've got an El Clasico this weekend. They are 4 points clear of Real Madrid. Most people, at least from a neutral perspective, want them to win La Liga this year. I think they have been the best side. They've certainly been the more entertaining side and the more cohesive side. But they play Real Madrid this weekend. Then they've got the Barcelona derby against Espanyol. Then they've got games against Villarreal and Athletic Club. Lose this weekend somehow after 120 minutes midweek, and suddenly it's looking a little bit dicey. So we've timed this well in terms of talking about Flick because it might not be the hot topic in a couple of weeks and maybe things could have even been better after last night, but it wasn't to be. But they have gone the last 15 La Liga games unbeaten. They played 3 games against Real Madrid this season and scored 12 goals. They are the strong favourites. And this year in the Champions League, 14 Champions League games, they've scored 43 goals and conceded 24. That is entertainment. Absolutely phenomenal. They've scored 5 goals 3 times. They've scored 4 goals 3 times. and 3 goals 5 times. Absolutely so entertaining. It's ridiculous. And in terms of Hansi Flick, so a brief overview of what happened in his career so far. So he was a former midfielder, played for Bayern Munich and FC Köln. He was involved in the European Cup final in 1987 for Bayern Munich. He retired early, which is a bit of a theme you see with a lot of top managers due to injury. He takes over at Hoffenheim in 2000. They were a 4th tier side then. He never gets up to the Bundesliga 2. He's fired in November 2005, works briefly at RB Salzburg as a sporting coordinator, which is a job he then goes back to at Hoffenheim. But between 2006 and 2014, he is the assistant to Jogi Löw at the German national team, which is a really strong era of success for the German national team, especially with how things have gone in recent years. They finished 2nd at Euro 2008, 3rd at the World Cup in 2010. That's the emergence of Müller and Ozil and Khedira and players like that, and moving on from the Ballack and Schweinsteiger era, for example. They reached the semi-finals of Euro 2012, and of course, they win the World Cup in 2014. He's then appointed the sporting director at the German FA between the 2014 World Cup and January 2017. He then goes to Hoffenheim as sporting director, but he only lasts 8 months.
Loves Hoffenheim, doesn't he? Jeez.
Loves it. And then in 2019-20, which I think is worth remembering, he is appointed the assistant of Niko Kovac, who was fired in November 2019. They'd won 5 and drawn 3 of their opening 10 league games, losing 2, which for Bayern, bit of a disaster. Niko Kovac out. Hansi Flick arrives. They lose 2 of his first 4 league games in charge, but they then go 19 league games unbeaten to the end of the season. They finished 13 points clear of Dortmund. They scored a club record 100 goals in 34 league games, which, given the fact, bear in mind that only, I think it's 3 sides in Premier League history who have 4 extra games have hit 100 goals. To do so in 34, absolutely brilliant. They win every single Champions League game. They beat Chelsea in a 2-legged last 16 tie, but that is when COVID strikes. It then goes 1-legged knockout games. They beat Barcelona. They don't just beat Barcelona. They absolutely annihilate them 8-2. They beat Lyon and then they beat PSG. The following year, he wins the league, but he's knocked out of the DFB Pokal by Holstein Kiel. They lose on away goals to PSG. And he wins the UEFA Super Cup and the Club World Cup, but he steps down from Bayern. He wants to take over the German national team, a job he's been linked with and gearing up for so long. But across his time at Bayern, just before we move on, 86 games, they lose 7, and he won 7 out of 9 trophies possible. They became the first side in Champions League history to win every single game on the way to winning the title. But in May 2021, as I said, he wants this German national team job. He goes unbeaten, easy to forget, through his first 10 games in charge, the first time in German history. But they lose 6 of their next 20. So at the World Cup in 2022, the most recent World Cup, they are trying to improve on a group stage exit in 2018. Not since the early 2000s have the German national team struggled to that extent at a World Cup. But this World Cup ends up being an equal, if not even bigger disaster. They lose to Japan 2-1 in the first game. They then draw with Spain. They beat Costa Rica 4-2, but because of Spain thrashing Costa Rica and Japan having an amazing group stage, they're knocked out at the group stage. They are accused of being a really unbalanced side, mistake-prone, lack of flair. It felt like really out of kilter, some of their defending with their midfield work, and it was a real underperformance. And some people point to the fact they didn't really have a natural 9 at that time. Füllkrug was their only real natural 9 in their squad. They did have Havertz as well, but he was only trusted for 66 minutes. Manuel Neuer continued his sort of slow demise, well, quite dramatic demise on the international stage at least. But he lasts until September 2023, and he's fired after 3 consecutive defeats. And he leaves as having the second worst win percentage of any German national team manager in history.
He's also the only German coach who's ever actually been fired.
A very good point.
I believe, yeah. Everybody else has stepped away for various reasons, but he is the only one to have been sacked.
So there we are. In September 2023, Hansi Flick has had an amazing 18 months or so, maybe just over at Bayern, but he has flopped in the job that he was set out to do and felt tailor-made for the German national team.
If you love smash burgers, the crispy edges, bold, beefy flavor, you need to try Omaha Steaks' all-new smash burgers. They're pre-smashed, made with 100% extra aged beef, and grill-ready. No mess, no griddle. I tossed a few on the grill last weekend, straight from freezer to bun in just 5 minutes. The sear? Perfect. The flavor? Rich, juicy, and seriously next level. Way better than anything I've had from the store. Plus, I grabbed the Built for the Grill pack at omahasteaks.com/smash and scored 16 smash burgers free. With high-quality meats always on hand, I'm already eyeing my next order. Maybe there's steak burgers or that killer bacon-wrapped filet. Family-owned since 1917, Omaha Steaks brings 5 generations of premium quality delivered right to your door. Smash burger lovers, this is your moment. Get ready to smash expectations with new Omaha Steaks smash burgers. Visit omahasteaks.com/smash and order the Built for the Grill pack with 16 free smash burgers. That's 16 free Omaha Steaks smash burgers at omahasteaks.com/smash. See site for details.
But then comes, Sam, the opportunity to take over Barcelona this season. And it's fair to say that going into this season, there were a few doubts. Barcelona hadn't had, by their very, very high standards, a particularly impressive final season under Xavi, and they finished quite a way off Real Madrid.
Well, Barca, it's amazing, isn't it, when you have to think back to August and the lay of the land in August, which is what we often do here when we're trying to contextualize things. Things just change so fast. I feel like I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of months talking about how like Liverpool have waltzed the title, and back in August we were all like, how are they going to get on in the post-Klopp season? Like, could be bad. Wasn't bad. And I think there were also question marks over Barcelona and Hansi Flick. Would the style take to the squad? Would the style take to La Liga? Because La Liga doesn't really experience the Hansi Flick tactical style very often, if at all. It's quite rare. German coaches don't go to Spain, and gegenpressing doesn't really make its way there. It's very different. So we had questions about that. I don't think anybody was drawing conclusions, but we were asking very fair questions. Of course, the financial issues that hang over the club like a dark cloud, also making things very difficult with players and registration and signings and all sorts. And I think we know from Flick's successes and failures that it can either go very, very well or very, very poorly. There doesn't seem to be too much in between. Yeah. And if the players aren't suited to what he wants to do, problems start to occur. And he does look to be relatively inflexible because he has a way of thinking and a way of playing. I think where he went wrong with Germany is that he actually compromised on his ideals, possibly because he didn't have the players to actually, make his system work. And my memory of Hansi Flick's Germany was they looked completely different every time they took to the pitch, either personnel or playing style. He could never pick his centre backs. Couldn't pick between a back three and a back four. Could never pick a left back. Didn't have a striker, but a lot of people at the time were saying, yeah, well, we don't have a striker. It's tough. Nicholas Füllkrug isn't that great. He can't carry the load. Fine, but the German team that won the 2014 World Cup, they got goals from everywhere. Miroslav Klose already scored twice in that tournament. And he got Ozil was scoring. Schürrle got so many goals, or Goetze. They had the goals from everywhere. It's not good enough to just say, well, we don't have a striker. We don't have a striker, especially since the team that he assistant managed those years ago drew goals from everywhere. Hummels, Hovedez at right back or left back or whatever it was. Mustafi was the other fullback. What a mess. Thank God he didn't try and replicate that entirely. But I think he certainly compromised on his ideals there. And that was a mistake, particularly for someone who coaches such an extreme and aggressive style. And I think we've seen that very true Hansi Flick extreme aggressive style come to the fore at Barcelona. I think La Liga have been taken as a league, literally as a collective, have been taken aback by Flick's style. I really do think that they struggled to comprehend what he was bringing to the table. And I wasn't totally convinced that Barcelona would slip into this and this squad would ally itself to this style. But quite clearly it has. And the presence of so many young players, young fit players, has been a massive positive to Flick, because the aggression and the energy that he demands from the team is like nothing you'll see in modern football, because the last 3 years we've been steadily moving away from pressing in terms of the general meta of tactics. And Flick is just rolling up his sleeves and dialing back down on it and going, no, we're going to press more than ever. I had a quick look at their PPDA figure earlier, at the passes allowed per defensive action. So for those that don't remember or don't know, the lower the number is here, the more aggressive the pressing is, and the higher the number, the more passive you are. I don't think I've ever seen a team go down below 7, Dougie. And Hansi Flick's Barca are currently on 6.55. Wow. I think this is the first time I've ever seen this figure drop below 7. Even the peak Pep City was 7 point something. This team is just pressing and playing the most aggressive football I think I've seen in 15 years. And you know what? I think it's having a knock-on effect here, and I think you see Barca dip through periods of games. Right now, I think they can only really play at their peak level for 30 or 40 minutes. I think they really struggle to maintain that level for any longer than that at this stage of the season. And I think it's because there's a lot of tread on the tyres and it's tiring to play this way. But if you can throttle a team in 30 minutes, then it doesn't matter. The problem is Inter stuck around for a while and were able to offer a few counter punches over the course of the 2 games. But Flick's Barca have been absolutely thrilling. What people have asked, though, Dougie, is, I think, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit there, you said the line between success and failure here is very thin. People, I think, tuning into these games and watching Barca for the first time have been asking the question, is there too much risk involved in his style?
I think it's a fair enough question to ask. It's difficult, isn't it? Because so much of what they gain through this high line does transcend and transfer to how they attack and the pressure that they're able to exert on the final third of the pitch. There was a stat that was actually said by John Champion last night on commentary that they've caught their opponents offside. It was something like 75 times in the Champions League this season. The next best was Villa in the mid-30s. So, I mean, that's amazing. Unai Emery is the master of the high line.
We are massive.
But Hansi Flick has done it more than double. And look, you saw a number of opportunities, even last night. The amount of times they caught Marcus Thuram just offside last night. And they executed it really well. But there are points where you're going to concede sloppy goals and you're going to concede momentum in ties. Their biggest issue for me was that first leg. They played well enough to win that game quite comfortably. And to concede with the only 3 shots on target that you faced in the entire game, Szczesny didn't have to make a save. And look, Dumfries scored an amazing goal. Marcus Thuram scored an amazing goal, kind of not freakish goals, but they don't happen every single game. But that gave Inter something to build on. And last night, I thought Inter really did step it up as well. And so many of their players, as we mentioned at the top, had much better ties, whether that's Dumfries, well, he had a great tie in the first one as well, but Barella, Mkhitaryan, I thought Jan Bissek defended really well. Bastoni really stepped up as well. And then Acerbi, kept Ferran Torres very, very quiet compared to what happened in the first leg as well. But I think there's just an element of the way that they've managed to manipulate this season to finish so strongly. And I do say that having just lost in the Champions League and been knocked out, but it did look like the season was kind of falling apart a few months ago. So they won 11 of their first 12 league games. They opened up a 6-point lead, but they then only took 6 points from their next 8. They lose 4 of those games. They lost to Sociedad, Las Palmas, Leganés and Atleti. But Las Palmas and Leganés, that's shocking. In that time, only Osasuna picked up fewer points. At that stage, they were third. They were 7 points off Real Madrid, who had finally clicked into gear. And I think that's around the time we did that podcast, being like, how bad has Mbappé really been? But the Spanish Super Cup...
It was also about the same time that I was calling Atletico as title winners.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that has aged.
No, it hasn't, but it's instructive as to... It feels like a long time ago, but it really wasn't. There wasn't an awful lot of faith in Barcelona at that point in the season. And that was only at Christmas.
Absolutely. And the Spanish Super Cup, beating Athletic Club, beating Real Madrid in that fascinating 5-2 game, which could have been anything, really. I think Real Madrid missed a number of opportunities in that as well. But then on the back of that, they've taken 41 points from a possible 45. Real Madrid and Betis are next best in that period on 32. So they've taken 9 more points than anyone else in La Liga in that time. And whilst you might have worried whether Pedri was going to be able to last the course. Yamal was going to be able to last the course. And to be fair, Koundé and Balde have picked up injuries that should be mentioned actually in the context of this tie as well. But their key players have stayed fit. And then you factor in the growth in players and the development of the relationship between Kubasi and Inigo Martinez, I think, has been crucial as well. Szczesny stepping in from retirement to have a real big impact as well. And Hansi Flick deserves enormous credit.
Yeah, it's on the risk conversation. It's interesting. You mentioned earlier the 8-2 victory over Barcelona that Bayern put together when Hansi Flick was in charge. This was 5 years ago. I just went and had a look at the goals and the chances, and I mean, it's incredible to watch that happen again. I mean, I remember being stunned by it in real time, and I was stunned by it again. This is an absolute hammering, sure, but Barca score a couple of goals, hit the post, and miss a one-on-one. The first goal they score is a ball over the top of Bayern's high line that Jordi Alba, so fullback, which seems contextually important, races onto, squares it across goal for Suarez, and Alaba, who is desperately trying to recover, just balloons it into his own net. The second goal is Messi dropping really deep and then sending a ball over to Alba over the top, who plays it into Suarez, and he turns Boateng and puts it in the net. I found that very interesting because it was Alba breaking the high line, running into space and squaring it for a goal. And I was like, we just watched that. Dumfries became Inter's second most forward player. And Dumfries was the one who was playing in that wide area where the space is against Hansi Flick's high line. He was the one that was getting the early pass. He's got the athletic capabilities to really hurt you. And he's the one that ended up with 5 goal involvements over the course of 2 games. So when I say things like Hansi Flick has returned to his very clear and obvious extreme identity, and that's crucial, it shows itself in the positives and in the negatives. But you're always going to give up space somewhere on a football pitch. You cannot be perfect. It is not possible. If you don't want to leave space in behind, then drop deep and don't press. If you want to press, then the space will be in behind. If you want to play narrow, then you will allow crosses. If you want to defend the wide areas, then the half spaces are going to be open and players are going to be able to make clever runs into the box and be found. There is always space. The whole game is about space. And Hansi Flick has made a very clear and obvious decision to allow space in one very specific area. And when it goes well, when he sticks to it, and when the players suit, it works brilliantly. And it's that old conversation of like, well, when you have just a national pool to pick from, you are quite limited. You are significantly limited in what you can actually choose. Yes, Germany have a lot of players, but they might only have four left backs that are of a requisite standard to play. And if none of them suit the system, Hansi Flick is boned. And there's nothing he can do about it. But when you manage a club and you have access to the whole world and the whole transfer market, you can be a bit more specific in those players. And I think we've learned for sure that if Hansi Flick gets players that suit his very consistent system, 4-2-3-1, high defensive line, fast defenders, like Fonzie Davies fast, Alejandro Balde recovery abilities, Kubasi recovery abilities, these things, high aggressive pressing, and of course he has to have Robert Lewandowski. Has to have Lewandowski or it all falls apart, apparently. If this all happens, this is great. And again, I'll just refer back to the 8-2. 3 of the first 4 goals came within 10 seconds of a pressing move, stealing the ball high up. He's not changed. He's no different.
Yeah.
Does the question become, boys, what happens next year? Because look, we're not going to predict here what happens in the Clásico the weekend. Look, Barcelona, I saw a brilliant tweet from Marty Hill yesterday, which said this Barcelona side have to be the best side of all time, who you could easily envision losing 5-0 almost every week. And I think that maybe does them a slight disservice in that
5-4.
They would definitely score 100%. But like, I take the point and the kind of thing of it. The question is, like, Inter worked it out, right? After 2 games, they worked out how to play it, and it still was on a knife edge. But that's what happens when you have quality players at both ends of the pitch, and they managed to kind of eke it out. Fine. But as more teams tried to work this out and tried to examine it, what happens next year? Is it something that's sustainable? Because look, we saw with Hansi Flick's Bayern, they went on an absolute crusade, right? And they ended up winning the treble. I think it actually ended up being a sextuple because they won the Club World Cup as well, if I'm not mistaken. And then you kind of come back to this and you think, well, what happened the year after? And yes, he walked away from that job to get the Germany job and to take that job. But equally, they weren't quite as effective the year after. But I wonder with this Barcelona team, because it's so young, I think it probably needs more legs in midfield. That will help when Marc Bernal and Marc Casado come back in there. But, we spoke about Gerard Martin right at the start of the podcast. And I don't want to hate on him because when you start whipping in balls like prime David Beckham in the middle of a game like this, it somewhat counters the idea that your defensive issues are there. But Barcelona have really struggled when players haven't been in those areas. So you've got to look at that and say, well, what do Barcelona need this summer? They probably need a forward to take over from Lewandowski as he comes towards the kind of twilight of his career. And they probably need to sign a left back.
Yeah.
Because they need to get cover in there that's going to be able to do what you say, Sam. But the point being that I think what we've seen here is that, yes, obviously games like this and games in the Champions League tend to be knife edge games at this point because the teams and the quality are so high. But when you actually come to it, if Barcelona go and do this again, and they add a few more players who actually can rotate in this system, there's a little bit more depth in the areas, there's left backs and potentially a follow-up right back who's able to step in for Jules Koundé in those areas to give them the athleticism they need in those spaces to continue playing like this. There's nothing to suggest that they couldn't get better again next year with a little bit more depth and a little bit more rotation.
Yeah, and they've made big leaps already this year because, again, you have to cast your mind back. Feels like so far, but this time last year, Barca were nowhere really in a Champions League context. They were not contenders. They never felt like they were in with a shout. They lost 4-1 at home to PSG. Obviously, they had a bit of a meltdown. Let's be honest, but they still were nowhere near it. And so to even to get to a point with step from A to B and B being why they could easily win this tournament. And I think lots of people will have been predicting them as winners a couple of weeks ago. That's a huge step. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't take too much more to put yourself in to get that extra 5%. And even saying that, like if Koundé and Balde were fit, would they have beaten Inter over two legs? Probably.
Maybe. Could anybody have hung with Dumfries yesterday in the way that he was doing? Like, Alejandro Balde is one of my favourite footballers on the planet, right? But like, if Dumfries is just doing that kind of thing, sometimes you just have to just be like, wow, Dumfries did a thing. He's like always somewhere between dropping this kind of game and then having his head up in space. And so like, sometimes you watch Dumfries and you're like, I have no idea what you're doing, pal. And sometimes you watch him and be like, is this the best footballer in the entire world? And there's no in between. That is it.
I actually think he drifted in and out of those two modes inside the same game on Tuesday night. There was one run that he went forward and he managed to take it about 50 yards. He got into the box, he looked up, he saw one Inter shirt and three Barca shirts. And he was like, well, I'm not going to be able to get across to him. He basically just gave up. He just gave up on the cross. And then 5 minutes later, he looked back to his best again. I mean, look, he did a fantastic job on Tuesday night of proving that he is actually a striker. So I might have to stop saying Denzel Dumfries, he thinks he's a striker, because he actually might be one.
Self-identifies as centre forward.
Absolutely incredible stuff from him. Dougie, what Jack's outlined there, maybe a left back and a striker with a view on the future. So mixing out with Lewandowski, is that enough to tip them over the edge for next year? Considering there may be a physical drop off from year one to year two, as we've potentially seen before.
Yeah, I'd have thought so. I mean, the age profile of that entire squad is really, really promising. I think it's probably worth mentioning as well that Gundogan was one of their best players for Barcelona last season. They lost him in the summer, and that felt like a big departure. I know anyone listening to this will be like, well, Gundogan's been pretty rubbish for Man City, and he has. But for Barcelona last year, he was actually their top assist provider. And you look at, if Balde is fit as well, I think you see a better Rafinha in that second leg. I actually thought Rafinha was quite quiet. And that's a credit.
That's only because they only passed to Lamine Yamal.
Yeah, but also I thought Bissek and Dumfries did a very good job on him defensively. I thought Barella covered him really effectively in that second leg as well. But without Balde basically playing as a left winger, stretching so much space, Rafinha didn't have the usual space to operate. And ultimately, the biggest compliment I can pay Hansi Flick is you want to see goals, you want to see entertainment, you want to see the best attacking players having fun and expressing themselves. And there is a very real situation that Rafinha could finish this season. I mean, he's already over 30 goals. He could finish with over 30 assists as well. Lamine Yamal has, emerged as one of the two, if not three, top three best players in the world. Pedri has had a phenomenal year. There is a very good argument that right now, and we don't know what happens with PSG and their potential treble, but I wouldn't be totally against seeing an entire Barcelona podium for the Ballon d'Or, given how well those three players have played this year. So Hansi Flick, I think you've done football a real service this year. And I really hope you get over the line in La Liga as well. I think you've been a much, much, much better side in La Liga. And it would really annoy me if Napoli win Serie A, even though I think they deserve it more than Real Madrid do, and Real Madrid win La Liga. It just doesn't feel quite right. So Hansi Flick, I salute you.
Okay, I feel like you've got a lot off your chest there.
There's a lot of theories and also a little bit of a rant.
Sometimes Dougie just really takes to a manager. Simone Inzaghi, Hansi Flick. You'd die for either of these two gentlemen, wouldn't you?
I do really like them. Also, I love a comeback. One thing I should mention, actually, which I stupidly forgot to mention in the Germany part, was there was an all or nothing Germany World Cup edition. And Hansi Flick then effectively became a bit of a meme, as typically in this world in 2025, people obsess over one clip. And in that clip, Joshua Kimmich was effectively just sort of not really listening to him and thought he knew best. And Kimmich, look, an enormously successful player, but he's used to a certain amount of player power with Bayern Munich. The Bayern Munich squad are very, very used to getting managers fired or causing issues with managers. I'm not putting this all on Kimmich, but Flick became a bit of a figure of fun. And I think a lot of people, when he was appointed Barcelona manager, thought, oof, that's a bit random. And look where we are now, a side that, they didn't reach the Champions League final, but they were so entertaining throughout, and they could still win 2 trophies and 3 if you count the Super Cup.
Just on that, is Flick slightly disrespected because of that Germany period, right? As in, obviously it didn't go to plan, right? And Sam, you've already outlined how it can be difficult to take over a national team, and only be able to pick from within the player pool. What I've learned today is that Hansi Flick should never be the athletic club manager, because it's not going to work to the same extent. But I think when you kind of look at it from that perspective, what he did with Bayern was stunning in so many ways, right? To take that squad after Kovac, was sacked very early on. So bear in mind, he'd only been at the club for what, 2-3 months by the time that Kovac left, and to take them on to where they were. And there was a lot of chat at that point about Kovac hating the dressing room and Flick giving power back to certain key elements and players and all of that, if you remember.
It's just good management.
More than, exactly. One, that's good management. And 2, he unleashed them in a way that we've not seen before, as you pointed out right at the start. And then suddenly, you have a tough time in an international job. I've always said that I struggle with the idea of international managers and club managers always being the same. There are obvious exceptions to this, but I think there are, general rules that mean that if you are a kind of coach who really likes being out on the training field and drilling a certain style into your players, you're probably not going to enjoy national management that much, because you do not get that time to try and instill your philosophy into it. And so we should have probably been judging Hansi Flick on his Bayern tenure rather than his Germany tenure when he took the Barcelona job. And therefore, this isn't to say that, it's all wrong, etc. But should we be this surprised that Hansi Flick has done a good job with the Barcelona side in his first term?
You just never know what damage that Germany tenure could cause to him, and not just from an outside reputation perspective, but just about whether or not he would start to question himself. And as we've sort of deduced and covered, Flick needs to be all in on Flick for Flick to work. And if he's wavering, if he's compromising, it's not happening. And the game changes, the sport changes. Back in 2019 and 2020, it was much easier to get a team of players like this to press and press and press, because that was the tactical meta. He's had to do a bit of convincing here, and he's had to go against the grain a little bit to install that philosophy in 2025. As I've already mentioned, the sport kind of moves away from that a little bit. You just never quite know how these things settle in. And so there are always fair questions, but He's knocked every single one of them out of the park as far as I'm concerned. He's not made the Champions League final, but he was oh so close. I guess I hope Barcelona win La Liga too, because they have been the better side. I don't really care what happens. I'm just looking forward to another really good Clásico at the weekend, as I'm sure you guys are.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll probably still be crying after Sunderland lose the first leg against Coventry, but I might have recovered by then. I think one final point to say about Hansi Flick is that going into yesterday's game, he was averaging a trophy every 16 games. Pretty nuts. That's my final point.
I'm looking forward to the book Dougie is going to write, which is 100 Facts About Hansi Flick You Didn't Know. I'm excited
by Simone Inzaghi.
I'm excited for my free copy. I'll read it in the garden this summer. Fantastic, guys. I think we'll leave it there. And I think I'm going to go and watch Barcelona 3 into 3 on repeat. Just going to go back
Stay
and watch
clear
it.
of Arsenal PSG, are you?
We'll watch the whole thing, do it all again. Fantastic stuff. Dougie, thank you for your impassioned defence and enthusiasm for a German manager you have never met and surely will never meet.
Well, let's not rule it out. I could, I don't know, head over to Barcelona this summer and see whether he's kicking around.
Yeah, well, if he listens to this, he'll get a restraining order before you get anywhere near him.
No
Jack,
doubt.
Thanks for producing and keeping us in line.
Thank you, Sam. Always a pleasure. I thought I'd just let you two kind of kick the bucket today. I did this game to death with Dean yesterday on Champions League Takeaway. So I thought I'd just, let everyone hear what you two had to say rather than sticking my big head in as usual.
Well, the great value you provided to this podcast came under the hood this week, because throughout this episode, as you well know, Dougie's in the studio on his own and the lights are on a timer and they keep turning off on him, and Jack was the only one that knew how to turn them on. So really, you've kept us afloat. Otherwise, Dougie would have been sat there for the last 40 minutes in pitch black.
Yeah, he also did a lot of...
It might cool him down.
He also really helped out this technophobe, plug in the microphone and get that working. So massive respect to Jack as ever.
A good reminder that a good producer makes a podcast. Lovely
Thank
stuff.
you very
All right.
much.
And the final thanks goes to you, Rank Squad. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed these games as much as we did. You surely did. You can't not have. And we'll see you same time next week.
Hello, Rag Squad. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds or Aviator Nation, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the businesses, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, who are home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not so secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning that way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ranks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ranks to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/ranks.